Okay. Dimensions. All right. I'm going to move this just a tiny bit. There we go. All right. So as far as creating dimension styles, your book does a really good job of helping guide you through the steps in creating a dimension style. Like I said before, you may want to make a note in your book that we are going to use the annotative feature of dimension styling, creating, whatever. But as far as all of the aesthetic features of dimensions, the book really, when you are setting up your dimension, other than changing the annotative portion of it, right? The book is very helpful in helping you generate all the settings, right? So if you are having a hard time moving through all of the different screens of dimension creation, which there are a lot of them, then just go to the book and look at what is set in the book, okay? All right, so before I show you annotative dimensions, I just want to show you why we're going to do annotative dimensions and why it's helpful. And I'm going to do that by opening up this. Let me see if this is an actual dimension. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, there's a good example, right? Never mind. But essentially, I just want to show you, I'm going to create a couple new dimension styles very quickly. Don't worry about following me through this. But I want to show you that, okay, text height 3/16. And where is that fit? There we go. So 96, I'm going to type in 96 right here. 96 is an 1/8 inch scale, right? So if I use this copy of standard, which I set to be an 1/8 inch dimension, right? When I dimension, the text is that big, right? That's for 1/8 inch. And if I were to come up here and create another dimension style, new, copy of the one I just created, and change that from 96 to 48, which is 1/4 inch scale, and hit OK, and DIM, dimension, create another dimension style. You see how the 48 scale text is half the size of the 96 scale text, right? And this is kind of the system of the old dimensions, right? Where we have to create a dimension style for every single scale that we use in AutoCAD. And obviously the scale is going to be represented in paper space, right? So if I have a viewport kind of up over here, right, that's 1/2 inch, then I'm going to use 1/2 inch dimensions to dimension things in this viewport. If I have another viewport over here that's a 1/4 inch, I would have to switch to 1/4 inch dimensions to then dimension things for this viewport, right? If I had one down here that was a 1/16 of an inch, I'd have to create a 1/16 of an inch dimension style and then dimension with that dimension style, okay? And the reasoning is because the text height on all of these different dimensions for the different dimension styles that are scaled at different scales, right? They're all different. And the reasoning is because, you know, when you are scaling something for an 1/8 of an inch, you have to zoom in 96 times to get that to read to scale, right? We've talked about that, how zooming and scaling are connected in AutoCAD. So because I have to zoom this in so many times to scale it, the text has to be bigger so that when it scales down, it looks the right size, right? And because I only have to zoom in half the amount of times, 48 times for a 1/4 of an inch, the text really only needs to be half the size of the 1/8 inch because we're zooming in half the amount of times to get the scale correct, okay? So this is the system behind our old dimension style, where we create, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of dimensions. They each have a different scale factor associated with them. And then when we are dimensioning things, we dimension them according to scale, okay? It's, once you kind of get the idea in your head, it's not that difficult, but it's kind of a pain in the neck, right? It's not a pain in the neck to make the dimension styles. It's not a pain in the neck to dimension. It's a pain in the neck when you change something, right? So if you've dimensioned a whole floor plan and it's at a 1/2 inch scale, and then you think, oh, I wish I would have done that at a 1/4 inch scale, Well, to redimension to make the text on the dimension read the right height, you would then have to change every dimension to the new dimension style, right? So
She erase and start over at that point.
that's exactly it. That's what you do, because that the text, you've aligned all of your dimensions with this text height, so they all very nice and proportionately lay out. Then when you change the text, it's half the size, and then you have to respace all the dimensions, and it's a pain in the neck. And so yeah, essentially you just grab them all and you delete them, right? And then you create new ones. So what's nice about the idea of annotative dimensions is that they flex, right? So we do still have to keep in mind, the scale we're dimensioning for, like, oh, we're dimensioning an 1/8 inch drawing, we're dimensioning a 1/2 inch drawing. But if we decide to change it, we don't have to worry about creating a new dimension style and then necessarily redimensioning everything, right? You may have some adjustments still, but you won't have to worry about a new dimension style. This portion of our class, right, this is really I think this shows AutoCAD's weaknesses, right, which is annotation. Revit is great in annotation. It updates, the height and the styles without you having to do anything. You change the scale, the dimension, and the text, they all update. And so that makes Revit really useful because you don't have to worry about, your annotation size all the time, right? But on the other hand, I think still, I'm pretty quick at Revit. I think AutoCAD is still faster to draw in, honestly. I wish that they would come up with some combination of the two, where we could have the functionality of Revit coordinating and dimensioning and all those things work really well, but then we have the drafting capability of AutoCAD, right? But this is definitely the weakness of AutoCAD. The coordination, the dimensions, the annotation, the tags, all those things. All right, so let's talk about dimensioning. We are going to manage our dimensions. Let me undo these things I just did. We are going to use what are called dimension styles, right? Which sounds probably, hopefully, familiar because you created some text styles earlier in the semester to generate text, right? We're going to use the same methodology with regard to dimensions. So we are going to create a dimension style. We are going to make it look the way we want it to look. We're going to assign a text style to that dimension style, so our text looks the way we want it to look. And then when we dimension, we will use that dimension style to dimension our drawings, okay? So what I'm maybe going to do first here, and this is kind of a side note, I'm going to create a text dimension style. So I'm going to type dim style 1. And I'm going to click annotative. Oh shoot, I can't remember what height. Well, we can change it if we need to, but I can't remember what height. Oh, I should look in our book. What height our text on our dimensions should be. 330 seconds. Okay, and we'll make this something so it looks different than what we're used to. Calibri maybe, and hit apply, set current. So this is our dimension style text, close. Okay, so just created a dimension style. And now what I'm going to do is I want to create an actual dimension style, right? We'll create a dimension style and then we will apply dimensions. So I'm going to access the dimension style dialog box, I'm going to go to annotate here, and then I'm going to click on this little flyout, right? And I'm going to click new, and we're going to call this dim style 1 and hit enter. When I hit enter, I get this dimension style, new dimension style dialog box, right? And I have a bunch of tabs at the top. I have lines, symbols and arrows, text, fit, primary units, alternate units, and tolerances, okay? And each one of these tabs has a ton of different settings in them, right? Again, all of these settings, and minus the annotative setting, are in the book, okay? So let's go through these, and I'll just talk about what all of these mean, and we will define these as we generate this dimension style. But essentially, a dimension is comprised of 4 different things, right? We have kind of, and it looks different right now, but we have what are called extension lines. So these vertical lines that come somewhat close to the object you're dimensioning. So we have these extension lines. Then we have the actual dimension line here, right? The baseline right here. Looks a little different right now, but that's where it goes. We have the actual number dimension, okay? And then we have our def points thing happening. Let me show you what that means. I'm going to just hit OK and close out of this real quick. Def points, this is a dimension, right? I've always told you not to use def points to draw with, and the reason is because it has other functionality associated with it that's just really not appropriate for general use. Oh, there we go. One functionality that is not helpful to us generally is that it doesn't print ever, and you can't change that. The other functionality and why def points was actually created was for dimension styles. And it was created so that we get this little grip right here at the end of our dimension extension line here. So this is the end of the extension line. This is kind of our little grip that if I click on it, it will attach and mark points on objects, okay? And that little grip is sort of indicated by a def points dot, right? So it's hard to see, but every now and again you'll catch a glimpse of it, right? You see as I select it right before it turns into a grip, there's a little point there, okay? And that little point is on the def points layer. So it never prints, it never interferes with geometry that it's trying to dimension, but that's essentially what the def points layer was created for. But we do have our dimension line, our extension line. We do have our dimension line. Even though you can't see it, we do have our text, right, the actual dimension, and then our def points layer. Okay. This type of dimension, right, when I just pulled a dimension without a defined dimension style, this is what I get. This is the number one probably error I see beginning students in AutoCAD create. They create this error, and they're like, oh, the dimension's not working, I don't understand, right? This is by default kind of the standard dimension style. So if you see this happening, it means that you're either using the standard dimension style 2 dimension, which doesn't have any definition, right? Or you just haven't defined your dimension style correctly and it's reading the settings for the standard style, right? So if this happens, you'll say, oh, it doesn't have a number, the number's really tiny, or it just doesn't look right, right? There's arrows at the end. That's the problem happening. Okay, back to our dimensions. Dim style, I'm going to hit modify. We're back here in our modify dimension style dialog box. Okay, so we have our dimension lines, we have our extension lines, okay, and we need to assign a color to each of those. We need to assign a color to each of those or define them to read the current layer they're on so that their line weights print correctly, right? I think hopefully you all understand that at this point. So as far as color goes, if I just open up this dialog box and I choose a color like magenta, right? That line will be magenta regardless of what layer it's on. So this color selection, when I choose a color, it kind of overrides whatever layer it's on. So if you always want your dimensions to be magenta and you don't care what layer they're on, then you will define the color as magenta. If you intend on putting your dimensions on the correct layer all the time, which you should, if you choose by layer, that option will let the layers read according to what layer they're placed on, right? Which I think is preferable, okay? I actually think this might be a deviation from the book. I think Jeff has you make them like cyan or blue or something here. Another deviation from the book. It's just kind of personal preference, honestly, and maybe like office standard type stuff. But I like to put my dimensions on the correct layer, and this kind of helps me do that because if it's on the wrong layer, it prints incorrectly, and I notice what's happening. So my color, I'm going to choose by layer, okay? And then as far as line type goes, we want them to be, we're going to leave it by block, And the block means it's set by this dimension block. So dimensions, I guess, in a roundabout way are blocks, but they don't function like the blocks we know about. So we're going to leave it continuous. We're going to leave the line weight continuous, okay? And we're going to just worry about those for now. Extension lines, so these lines, we also, for me, I prefer to have them by layer. My current layer is blue, so that's why they're, you know, kind of previewing blue right now. I'd make this a little bit bigger so we can see that better. What I really like about dimensions, I don't like that they have a million settings, but I do like that when you change a setting, it updates in this preview dialog box, right? So you can kind of, if you're lost, you can kind of mess around and figure things out. But this tab, all we're going to do is change the color designation, so by layer. Symbols and arrows, we click there, and this is where we're going to change what this dimension line looks like, okay? So instead of having it look like a closed and filled arrow, I want it to look like an architectural tick or an oblique. Architectural tick is slightly thicker than an oblique. Okay, second architectural tick, and then leader, we're going to leave it closed filled. Okay.
What's the leader?
The leader, it's a dimension, but instead of being, it's like this right here.
Oh, okay.
But it's going to point things out instead of actually dimensioning them.
That makes sense.
So center mark on a circle dimension, I'm going to click none because I don't really want that showing. And that's pretty good for now, right up here. Some more settings are arc length symbol. This one right here, I'm going to choose none. And it doesn't give you a preview up here, but I'll show you what that means in a minute. Okay, so choose none there. And we're good on this dialog box. So architectural tick here and there, none, and then none over here as well. All right, so we have it kind of generally looking more like an architectural dimension. I'm going to compare to text. All right, and this is where I'm going to change the text here. Sorry, I just remembered something I forgot to do actually, but we'll go back to that. So instead of this being a standard style, I had defined the dimension style, right? Text. So I'm going to click on dimension style text. And you see that it changes, right? And it changes, and now the text style, it controls the text in the dimensions, right? So I could change the text height here if I wanted. I could do some other things with regards to text, but now those have grayed out because the dimension style has those built in. So dimension style is now controlling dimension in here, or the dimension style text in here. The text placement, okay, vertical, we want it above the line, right? So it was centered net before, now we want it above, and horizontally we want it centered. This looks pretty good. Final thing on here, aligned with dimension line. Okay, I'm just going to hit OK for now before we change to fit, because I forgot to do one thing, and it was kind of like maybe, oh shoot, it was maybe like the most important thing, but I don't know if I can go back now. Shoot. Okay, well, we'll go, I know how to fix it. We'll come back to it. Okay, I'm going to click on my style and hit modify, and we're back where we were. All right, I'm going to go to fit now, and here, if there isn't enough room to place both the text and the arrow inside the extension line, the first thing to move outside the extension line is, and we'll put either, we're going to put text. So if this text gets too big, it will come off the extension line and it'll leader. When text is not in the default position, place it beside the dimension line, over the dimension line with a leader. That's what we want. Okay. And then here, oh, there we go. Okay. So here is that thing I was like, oh, the most important thing. Here is where we define our dimension style as annotative. Now, I'm going to show you another place to do it as well, but this is really where, if I check that annotative box right there, this is what differentiates kind of the old style of adding dimensions to kind of our new way of doing it, right? All right, so we want to make sure that's checked. If that wasn't checked, we would have to change the scale to whatever scale our drawing was. So 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, right? And when I was working in an office, we probably literally had, 15 of these dimension styles, because you had one for every dimension, scale that you used. And then you had an accompanying leader style. So you had 30 dimension styles in your drawing. So this is a much better way of doing it. Primary units. So I'm going to the next tab here, primary units. We are going to change this to architectural. Of course, right? Our precision, we want this to be a 1/16. We want the fractional format to be, we'll do horizontal, the fractions will look like this. If this is personal preference, you can have it diagonal, right? Whatever you want it to be. Rounding off, do you want your dimensions to say 1 foot 4 and 12 30 of an inch? No, probably not. So we're going to round these off to 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And that's it. So we're going to leave alternate units and tolerances alone. And this is essentially our dimension style, okay? So lines, we want them by layer, and those look good. Symbols and arrows, tick, tick, close filled, none, and none here.
On the text.
Text,
Do you change the text color to stay by block, or do you want
Oh,
to go?
we missed one. We'll do by layer again.
Okay.
Yep, by layer. You can also, again, if you wanted it to always be magenta, you could change it to magenta. But I think the system works in AutoCAD where we have a layering system and we assign colors to layers. And so when you start saying, hey, all of that works except this object or except that object, things start not to work very well. Yep.
Can we look at like the main text again? Because when I changed mine to the dim style, it didn't doesn't look like yours basically.
Oh.
It's like the text height doesn't change to where it's set.
To where it's centered?
Where it's set. Like,
Okay. So, you're allowed to set it right here, essentially. Okay. So yes. So here I can change it to whatever dim style. But what's nice about this is that if I click on this little browser right here, this ellipsis, right, I can go right back to my text style. So I have my dim style here. It's annotative, and I have it at Calibri. I've specified a height, right? And did you know? So here's something, right? This is a good indication, or this is a good illustration of something. I typed in 3/32, right? And it switched it to 1/8. Likely, I bet in my drawing here, my precision is set to 1/8. And so I set something slightly, smaller than that, and it rounded up to the nearest highest precision, right? Right? So so this is the perfect illustration of precision. Nobody ever understands it, right? But this is what happens.
I think I was struggling with that when we were doing like
Yeah.
text and justification, and I ended up opening a new drawing.
Yeah, and
This would not like stay that happy in it.
yeah, I'm sure. Yep. So that's what happens with precision. You're trying to draw a line that's a 16, and it doesn't sound very realistic, but when you're drawing things like millwork details or, very fine detailed things, and you need a 1/16 of an inch reveal, and you draw that and it doesn't work, it's likely because your precision isn't set fine enough. So we have our dim style. I've changed mine to Calibri. It's annotative, and then the text height is 1/8 of an inch, and I hit OK. I didn't change anything. Does yours look like that?
yeah, now it does. I just want to know
Okay.
entered in the text height.
Okay.
That was the only thing.
Good. So fit, primary units, we're pretty good. So I hit OK. All right. And I have my dimension style 1. Now, if I close this out and I needed to edit something in that dimension style, right? Like I wanted the text height different or something different about it, right? To access that again, I would choose this flyout menu. I've got my dim style. I would select the one I wanted to edit, and I could click on modify. And I could make any changes I needed to make. So if I need to go back into the style and change it, this is where I would go. Okay. I can click on it and hit set current and close. And now you're going to see up here in my dimension tool palette that dim style number 1 is selected. I can view it in the gallery, and it is the dimension style that I'll be using, currently. Now what's nice about this again is that I only really have to have one dimension style, right? You can make other dimension styles that have different text styles and different ways that they look and, you know, all that good stuff. But now this makes it a lot cleaner. I don't have, you know, 30 different dimension styles in my gallery. It just makes it really easy. Okay, so now it's time for me to dimension, okay? In this dimension tool palette, this little drop down right here, I have a lot of different types of dimensions I can use, right? I have a dim continue option, which we're gonna talk about, continue and baseline today. And then I kind of just have my quick dimension that will create, you know, several different types of dimensions within one command, right? So that's just kind of the quick dimension. If I go to my home tab, I do have that like a smaller version of that dimension tool palette here. So once I have my dimension style established, right, I can dimension from this main tool palette here, from the main tab. All right. Now, you know, before we get into actually dimensioning, I just want to remind you that we're using annotative dimension styles, right? And so the same rules apply to annotative dimension styles that apply to annotative text. You know, before we go and start dimensioning, we want to set our annotation scale, right? So we're going to say, hey, we're going to dimension at 1/4 inch, click, right? And then when I dimension, those dimensions will be appropriate for 1/4 inch, right? Hey, I want to dimension at 1/8 inch. Okay, well, I want to change this to 1/8 inch, and then I want to dimension, and the text on your dimension will be appropriate for 1/8 inch, right? So AutoCAD essentially, instead of you manually telling AutoCAD, hey, you know, the text height has to be this big for this dimension to function correctly, AutoCAD automatically makes that compensation. The same thing applies to annotative dimensions with regard to text, as far as the filtering out in viewports, right? So the viewport that is 1/8 inch, it, unless you specify otherwise, will only show 1/8 inch scale dimensions, right? And that is so helpful, right? Because a lot of times you may have a floor plan where you dimension the entire floor plan at 1/8 inch, but then you want to zoom into one special area and you want to show it bigger, right? So you make it 1/2 inch, but then you have these 1/8 inch dimensions that you're trying to deal with while you're adding another set of 1/2 inch dimensions, right? The convoluted world of AutoCAD. It's a real problem. But this makes it really easy because you can add dimensions on top of dimensions and they filter out through the viewport, essentially. I'm going to create a new page setup here. I'm going to do an 11 by 17 landscape PDF. And PDF. 11 by 17 layout, do extents. Okay, LaserJet. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna do one view, well, two, hopefully all three of these fit. Dang it, just barely too big. Hopefully these all work, but there we go. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just kind of be working with these objects. I'm going to do, you know, maybe I do them. Sorry, I keep having these new ideas. Let's do 2 sets of these. Stretch. Look how nice and easy that I really miss the drafting capabilities of AutoCAD. I use the Revit a lot more now. I miss AutoCAD. I don't miss the coordination in AutoCAD. I'll just clarify. I don't miss the coordination, but I miss the drafting. It's so much faster. Revit has a lot of menus. Has anybody taken Revit yet?
Next.
Not yet?
Yeah, next semester.
Okay. Revit has a lot of menus. Okay, we'll do one. Are any of you taking it at night? The 10 o'clock? You haven't decided yet?
Today.
Did you say 10 o'clock?
8 to 10, 20. I'm teaching at 8 to 10, 20. I know. I get a lot of construction management students because they have, you're in construction management, right? Is that
No,
right? Oh, you're architecture. That's right. I get a lot of construction management students in the night course because they have like cost estimating or something right before from like 5 to 8. I don't know, it's a long class. And then 5 to 7:50, and then they come right to Revit from 8 to 10:20. It's rough. It's I know it's good in that they can take it that late, but it's rough.
I might end up doing that.
It's it's a good class. It is rough. We'll do a 16th here. Sorry guys, I'm just gonna scale these so that I can show you that they filter out. There we go. That's what we want. Okay, so these will both be 16th. Okay, looks good. And then I'll scale these all at different sizes, so maybe something like an 1/8, and we'll make this one 1/4. Really 1/4? Yep, okay. And then maybe 1/2. Okay. 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, and these are all 16th down here, okay? Here's another, well, this is one thing I don't like about AutoCAD. I kind of wish I could see my model space and my paper space on the same screen, right? In Revit, you can tile your views so you can see them at the same time. It's really nice.
That's actually really nice.
Isn't that really nice? Yeah, especially, we have these gigantic screens these days now, right? So it would be nice if you could do that. Maybe that's like a customization thing you could do. All right, so let's add a couple of dimensions, right? And I'll just make it fairly simple. We have, and I guess I'll just go through and explain these first. We're only going to do these first 5 dimensions. We have a linear dimension, and that creates purely straight dimensions, regardless if you are dimensioning like an angled thing, right? So that little graphic shows an angled bottom chord of that triangle, and the dimension is still straight. We have aligned, which creates aligned dimensions. So it will follow the angle of the object that it is dimensioning. I would say that's probably by far I use that the most, the aligned dimension. We have angular, which dimensions angles. We have arc length, which dimensions arcs. We have a radius, dimensions the radius, the center of the circle to the outer dimension of the circle. And then we have a diameter, okay? Dimensions are really easy to use. By far, probably the easiest thing ever to use in AutoCAD. They work really well, they stretch really well, they have integrity. So when you stretch them, they don't fall apart and skew and act weird, right? They all work really well. Okay, so if I wanted to, for example, start dimensioning this object right here. This was an 1/8, right? So I have to think, okay, this is an 1/8 inch, okay. I have to first think about what dimension scale, what scale I'm gonna be printing this at before I dimension it. So when you get to this stage of drawing, you normally don't dimension till the very end, unless you're using them to help you design, right? But you have to kind of lay out your pages first, and then you have to dimension so that you know what scale they're gonna be printed at. So I'm going to change my annotation scale here to 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to come up here to linear dimension, click, okay. At the command line it says specify your first extension line origin, okay. So I'm going to go to the end point I want to start my dimension at, click, move to the second point, click, move up, click, and there is my dimension. Okay. Now I'm looking at this dimension style and I'm thinking, I don't really like that edge of that extension line doesn't come out. So I'm going to come up here to my dimension style manager, modify that dimension style. I'm going to go to lines, extend beyond ticks. I'm going to up that a little. This is that setting. Oh, too much. I was looking over here hoping. So you see there, I get a little bit of extension, which I like. So I'm going to hit OK, close, and I've updated that dimension, right? So it is very easy to manipulate dimensions once they've been created. Okay, so 23 foot. I'm going to click on linear dimension again, click, click, drag it out, click, there's my next dimension, right? Now you look at this and these are all formatted according to the dimension style that we generated, right? We have a stacked fraction there, right? These objects are centered and aligned above the dimension line here, right? Everything looks really good. Linear, click, click, and it won't follow that angle, right? I have to pull it out straight, click. I could hit enter to reinitiate that same command, click, click, pull it out. If I want to line a dimension up with a dimension next to it, right, I pull the dimension out and I just click on the one next to it, click, and it lines up, okay? If I want to move the dimension, I click on it. I can click on this grip, stretch it down, click, right? It's just really easy to manipulate, right? Very different from our stretch command, because if I had done that with a regular line, right, what would have happened? It would have skewed, right? So dimensions have a lot of integrity. One thing I am immediately noticing is that, yep, I'm on A anode dimension. I'm going to look on my layer properties. It's blue. Let's say we change that to white or gray. I close out, they all immediately change that color, right? The system works, the system works. All right. So this all looks really great, and these are for 1/8 inch dimensions. I go to my paper space layout and my it's magic. When you guys start working in Firm, you're gonna just die, it's just, this is great. It didn't used to be like this, and dimensioning was so much work. I mean, it still is a lot of work, but this just makes it so nice that it knows what it needs to do. Okay, so we have our linear dimension. I'm going to go back to annotate here and linear dimension, click, click, there we go. Okay, perfect. Now, I'm going to come down to, let me look at this one was 1/4 inch. I'm going to come over here to my little circle, right? I'm going to switch over to a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to dimension this circle. So I come up to my dimension types, and I have a radius dimension. Radius, yep.
It changed the dimensions on that shape that we did over there.
Oh, I might be, okay, so I have add scales to annotative objects when the dimension annotation scale changes. I have this little setting checked. Let me undo that. So that right there, I'm going to uncheck that, and then it shouldn't apply that scale to here, to those dimensions. Shouldn't. There we go. So I changed it to 1/4, and now those remain at 1/8. So if you wanted to be a little bit more dynamic and you wanted those to change with whatever dimension scale you change to, right? Then you check this little annotative, add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes, right? So essentially what happened there is it added a scale to that dimension. So these were created in 1/8 inch annotative scale, but when I changed my model space to 1/4 inch, it added that to those dimensions. So they should, let me recheck that and then change this. This is at 1/4, right? They should now read so they still read in the 1/8, right? Which if they were 1/8 inch and I've changed my model space to 1/4, you would think, oh, they don't read, right? They shouldn't read in there at 1/4 inch scale, but they have 2 scales associated with them now. So these dimensions will read in both of those. Does that make sense what I was trying to explain?
Yeah.
Somewhat? Okay. I want to undo that though, because I don't want to add those annotation scales. I want to show you what will happen keeping these all separate. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck that little guy. All right. So I'm going to change my annotation scale now to 1/4 inch. I'm going to come up to radius. Right, and essentially you're just picking the dimension that makes most sense for whatever you're doing. I chose the linear dimension to create this style, but I also could have used aligned, and that would have been just fine, right? I'm using the radius one here. You could have used diameter, whatever you want it to illustrate. So there's my radius right there, okay? And you notice that this is a 1/4 inch, and it's half the size, the text is half the size of the 1/8 inch, right? we'll do a diameter just for fun. Click, click, there's my diameter. These dimensions also are very, you can manipulate them very easily. I click, click, I can move it, right? Click. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I was trying to get my diameter one. There we go. That one's not as easy to manipulate, but you guys get the idea. I've got the little diameter symbol, so I know it's a diameter. So I come over here to my layout, I look, and I do have my 1/4 inch dimensions working here. Now here's the real magic, right? So if I look in model space, this text is very obviously double the size of that text, right? I look at them and I can see visually the difference in model space. And when I go to paper space, they're exactly the same size printed, right? Which is what we want to happen, right? So in model space, this might be 6 feet tall, that might be 3 foot tall text, but they are scaled appropriately so that when we look in paper space, they are 1/8 of an inch, hopefully, right? 1/8 of an inch, right? You see that? And the system is, it works most of the time. My husband's working on a project. He's doing some record drawings, finishing up this project, and there's probably 30 Revit models involved in this project. And he has to sort through and like fix all the errors that happened in the models. Oh, he's so grouchy. Because I say the system works because this is working, you know? It's like when nothing works, it's just a nightmare. Anyway. All right, so we have one more over here. We are going to change this to 1/2 inch now. Okay, and I'm going to click on linear, or we'll do aligned. Click, click, pull it out, click, and I have my 1/2 inch. And I will do a arc length, click, because I have an arc down here, click, drag it out, click, looks good. And linear, click, click, drag it out, click. Now I've been clicking and dragging to show you how dimensions work, but there's also another option for selecting what you dimension. If I click on linear, for example, it'll say specify the first extension line, origin, or select your object. So if I hit enter, it'll give me a little pick. Bless you. Click, click. So I have the option to, ooh, bless you. I have the option to pick endpoints, but I also have the option just to select the entire line, right? Which is, I would kind of assume, is slightly more accurate, because when you're clicking endpoints, you might miss an endpoint and grab a different endpoint, or, you know, it sounds ridiculous, like that'll never happen. It happens, trust me. And so when you're saying select the object, it selects the object in its entirety, right? So there's no guessing as to which endpoint you're picking or whatever. And so I've got all of my dimensions selected, right? Here's my 1/2 inch, I've got my 1/4 inch, and I have my 1/8 inch. Oop, I'm frozen. There we go. And they all show up very nicely in their respective places. And this is the largest text in model space, medium, smallest, and the magic of it all. I keep saying magic because this makes me really happy when everything is very nice and the same size and it all works, and you know. But this is the same size printed as that. Okay, we'll do one more down here. And this is the real true magic of this system that we're doing right now. I can change this to 1/16 of an inch, right? And I could come in here and I could dimension, I'm just gonna make some weird dimensions. It's so large because this has to zoom in 180, 100, what's 96 times 2, right? 194, 109, was that right? Anyway, you guys get the idea, right? But it has to zoom in over 180 times, right? To make that text and to scale the drawing and to make that text look the right size. And so it is going to be a lot larger than, this is 96, 182, right? So this is 182 times, this is a 96 inch zoom, 96 times zoom, right? But it is showing up there slightly off the screen here, of course, but it is showing up there, right? This is something that would be a lot more difficult to do in AutoCAD if you were just using regular old dimensions, because I'm able to put these one on top of the other here, right? And with regular old dimensions, you can manipulate the viewport, which is kind of a different thing, but there is really no filtering, a good filtering system to make this work easier, right? So that's really very, very helpful. Okay. One thing you may have noticed that I had just done, do you see how I missed that line there, right? I created my dimension and it missed that line. And that is one thing that you'll notice. Dimensions can kind of just be created in the middle of nowhere, right? Good and bad. Good and bad because when a dimension has to be connected to something, then it has to actually connect with something and measure something, right? But when it can just be created in space, it can miss the object entirely and give you kind of the wrong dimension, right? Anyway. All right, so we have dimensions, okay? I'm going to come back to my, well, let's just leave it as, no, let's go to half inch. I want to go to half inch. I'm going to go back to my half-inch scale dimensions here, okay? And let's talk about creating baseline dimensions, and then also another one of my favorite things about AutoCAD dimensions is faking the number on them, which is more difficult in Revit. Although you shouldn't be faking dimensions, sometimes you have to. Okay.
In the field, they call it fudging.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it, right? It's infuriating in Revit sometimes. Okay, so here I've got my dimension, and you know, if I, for example, had, let's grab this object. I'm just going to create a couple, look, shingles. If I had a couple of these things, right, and I've started my dimension here, but I want to kind of continue and sequence all of these, I could, you know, type in, well, and let me say this, I can click on linear again and start dimensioning, but I could type in a dimension, dim, and I start getting dim linear, dim continue, dim angle, right? Dim linear is the one you probably want, and I could continue dimensioning, okay? I could also click up here on dim continue. And continue will allow you to take a dimension that's already established and then just kind of continue on dimensioning, right? So if I click on continue, it'll say, if I had just created a dimension, it will, you know, very smartly think, hey, they want to continue the one they just generated. But if I hadn't just kind of generated a dimension, it will say, hey, where do you want to continue on? Or if the dimension that it chose last or previous, you don't want to continue that on, then you would hit enter and use this method to pick the one you wanted to continue. So here I want to continue this dimension, so I click, and then I just continue dimensioning. Click, 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 escape. Okay, so that's dim continue. So if I click on continue now, because I was already generating dimensions, right, it is allowing me to just kind of continue on. Escape, escape. I also have dimension baseline. So I've created all of these dimensions, right? But I want to create dimensions above them. Well, I could just click on linear, and I could click, click, and sort of, you know, pick where I wanted that baseline to go, click. Or I could click on baseline dimension, click on the one I want to start with, and AutoCAD, click, starts a new dimension for me above that, right? And it spaces it according to the baseline spacing that is set in your dimension style. So if I look in here, I've got a baseline spacing here of, you know, almost a quarter of an inch or almost a half inch. And so it will make that appear, you know, it's larger in here because it's compensating, but that will, when printed, appear as a half inch, right? So I can get one baseline and then hit continue, and I could continue on with, you know, kind of this set, right? And then baseline, it will enter, click, and I can get a new one there, escape. And you see how this is the trick with baseline. It just, I click and it starts a new one above it because it just, that's its job, right? To start new baseline spacings. So I usually will start the first dimension with it, and then you have to do dim continue to continue on at that level. But what's nice about this is that it very nicely creates these evenly spaced objects, right? Moving up there. Okay, so we have our dimension style created. We have the ability to make dimensions. We know that to make them annotative, we need to change our annotative scale, right, to make them the appropriate size. If you want to have dimensions that are kind of, I guess, multifaceted, or not multifaceted, but multi-use, you could check this little add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes, right? So if I created a dimension and then I create 10 more and I change the annotation scale 10 times, then that annotation scale would be added to this one, and it would be you'd be able to view that in multiple scales in your paperspace layouts, right? I would say just in general, I mean, that's good if everything is the same scale on the you want it to read all the same in every viewport. But I think kind of the beauty of annotative is that it filters dimensions based on scale, right? So you maybe want a little of that filtering functionality to happen. So I tend to say maybe leave that unchecked and just change your annotation scale, okay? All right, let's see here. Make sure that I've gotten everything.
On the ticks,
Uh-huh.
do you prefer the architectural tick or the oblique?
For a long time I liked the oblique better, but now I think I kind of like the architectural tick because I think that it makes it a little easier to read the dimension.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like if you look at that floor plan you've been drawing, and I had a girl last semester that had a lot of trouble with this. Where's that? I know it's here somewhere. So if you look at that floor plan, or like on 251, those look more like oblique dimensions to me, and she was having trouble kind of reading across and being able to tell which tick went with which dimension. And so I think having that architectural, it makes it slightly darker so that you can see the indication that there's been a change here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let me make sure I've gotten everything on dimensions. I feel like the lecture on the other dimension styles is so much longer because it's so much more complicated. We have a tiny bit more time. Maybe I'll do leaders real quick so you guys can see leaders very quickly. Okay. All right, so I think that is pretty good as far as dimension styles.
One more question on the dimensions.
Yep.
On the side of the blocked object.
The block object.
Sorry, I don't know what to call the stupid thing. The one on the top.
This one?
Yeah, that one.
Uh-huh.
So on the right side, how the dimension is between the line and the dimension line, can you make that go on the other side?
Oh, this one right here. Oh, okay, good. I'm glad you asked that. Sorry. Yes. I was like, there's got to be something I'm missing. Yeah, so the text is sort of, it's part of your dimension, but it is somewhat separate in that I can click on it and grab that grip, and I can click and drag it over to the other side.
Much nicer.
Yeah. The other thing is editing the text, okay? So this dimension style has this text piece that says 23 feet, right? And what's nice about dimensioning in AutoCAD is that I can alter these a tiny bit, right? So if I double click on this text very fast, click, click, okay? My cursor's in front of the text, so if I start typing, it goes in front, right? But I could do something like, I could move my cursor to the end and I could type, you know, space, AFF, above finished floor, or verify in field, right? So I could do that, I could hit close text editor and that would work, okay? I could click, click very fast. I could delete everything and I could say something like 23 foot 1 inch, because I know it's 23 foot 1 even though I only had 23 feet, right? The beauty of fudging it. Close text editor, and I can change it, okay? Now, the bad thing about this is that I visually cannot tell that anybody's changed that, right? So when you're managing a project, you could look in there and you're like, oh, well, it says that we have 23 foot 1 feet, but you know, that could be a good dimension or a bad dimension. And so I think you have to be selective about changing those, and maybe also come up with a system where if you have changed something that you note it, you make a notation so that somebody can recognize it, right? Like 23 foot 1 inch, and if there's text after it like verify, then it's been changed, right? Anyway, but you can fudge it a little bit. You can add text to it. You can grab this grip and move it where you want it to go. Now this right here, this is called a leader, right? The leader's ugly. I hate it. I try to avoid them because they're awful. And this setting right here, if you go back to your dimension style here, at one of the last offices that I worked at, where we have fit, where it says, let's see, where is it? Over the dimension line with a leader, that is that setting. So in our office, we just put over the dimension line without a leader or beside the dimension line, okay, close. And you see how it changed it, right? So it goes off to the side. But what we would do is we wouldn't even have it with a dimension object, and we would just draw in a little arc that just kind of said, hey, here's our little leader, right? Ugh, I hate arc. So then this one is being very bad today. There we go. We'd have to do a little leader, which is, again, doesn't work within the parameters of the system, but visually it's the only way you can make it work. Revit has kind of solved that, where they have a very nice leader system and it works really great, but AutoCAD doesn't necessarily have that just yet. All right, so those are our dimensions. We also have, I'm just gonna go over leaders real quick. I think we'll take like 10-15 minutes and do leaders. We also have what's called a multi-leader, and it is a type of dimension, but it, instead of dimensioning a specific distance, it provides descriptive information for drawings, right? So leaders are going to call out things like, well, in fact, let me find the leader assignment in your book. It's on page 2-49. So, when you get to a detail level or you have a floor plan or something that needs some description, right? Like you're calling out furniture in your floor plans, or on this foundation detail, you're calling out, what's the concrete wall? Where's the anchor bolt? Where's the vertical rebar, right? Those are all leaders, and they're all descriptive annotation, okay? You can have descriptive annotation in the form of like text, like that, or you can add a keynote bubble to your leader and key it back to a legend, okay? We're not going to get into the keynote topic, but we do have these descriptive text multi-leaders that we'll work with, right? So multi-leader here, multi-leader functions just like dimensions in that we have a style associated with it, okay? And to access the style, I'm going to click on this little flyout menu here, okay? I'm going to click on New. and we'll call this ML multi-leader style 1. Continue. There are fewer settings. We have 3 tabs. The leader format, we can have it straight or you can have it splined, which is a curvy line. Okay. I think the more generally accepted format is straight. Color is going to be, again, by layer. We want to do that just like our dimensions, right? We have our line type. We'll leave these by block, or we want our line weight by layer, actually. Okay, so colors and line weights by layer, so that if you put it on a new layer, it associates with that layer. Symbol, we do want an arrow. This is the size of the arrow. If you want a little larger, right, a little smaller, click, click, click. I'm gonna make this slightly bigger. Okay, leader break, we're not gonna worry about that right now. Leader structure, how many times do you want to click before this leader is placed? Generally, you have click once to place the arrow, click twice to place this landing line, click a third time to place the text. Or you could click once, click twice, and then place the text. So I think 2 clicks is a pretty good amount of clicks before you place your text. Automatically include the landing, yes, that line right there is the landing. Set landing distance, we're going to leave that as is, but it's essentially kind of the distance between the text and the landing. Yes, we want this annotative. We don't want to have to specify our scale every time, right? This functions exactly like a dimension in that the text and the leader size scale up and down depending on what scale factor you're scaling your drawings at, okay? So we want it annotative so we don't have to worry about that. And then content. What text style do we want to use? No. Yes, text, sorry. I was getting ahead of myself looking at that. Multi-leader type. We want it mtext so that we can type in our text freely as mtext functions. Text style, we will change this to our dim style 1. And you see the dim style 1 now controls what this looks like and then also the text height. Do we want this a horizontal attachment? Yes.
We want the text color by layer?
Yep, you caught that. There we go, by layer. I forget that one. Yes, by layer. Okay, and horizontal attachment. Okay, there we go. It is going to attach here horizontally, and then let's see. No, yes, sorry. We want, if we do have to have a vertical attachment, you know, I think they've changed this a little here. I don't think we used to have, did we used to have that option? Which is a good addition, actually. Anyway, because I'm going to change these and see what happens. Middle of text. Okay, good. That didn't, okay, that's good. This was, I feel like this is a little bit different, but we do want a horizontal attachment right there so the line remains horizontal, right, and not vertical. But when this attaches, when this leader attaches to the piece of text, I want it to align to the middle of the text, right? So that it looks like that and it doesn't look like that. Does that make sense? So if you see that happening, which you might by accident, make sure this is set to middle of text, middle of text. We'll leave that alone. And that's really it for leaders, right? So you only have to create one style and not bad, right? So I hit OK, I hit set current, close. And now if I want to create a leader, right, here's the multi-leader tool. Click. I click on I click where I want the leader to go. I click a second point to start the text. This is a multi-leader at 1/2 inch scale. Enter, and then I can choose close text editor. There's my little multi-leader. I'm going to M for move it. I'm going to move it. I'm sorry. And this was our 1/2 inch, right? You see the text is going to be the same size as that, right? Click. I can click on the leader. I can drag it to where I want it to go. Click. And this is how a leader is going to function. things about, just in general, things about leaders, things about dimensions, right? We're getting to the point where neatness is very important, right? Neatness is very, very, very important in drawings. You want your dimensions to not look like this. You want them to hit the point they're meant to hit. You want them to measure what they're meant to measure. You want them to line up very nicely, right? We want a consistent baseline spacing, right? We don't want our dimensions to cross over architectural elements, if possible, right? We don't want things, you know, obscuring our dimensions, right? It just looks bad. Our leaders, when we create leaders, so I've created one leader, I can create another one if I want, right? I try and line up my leaders, and do you see how, this sounds really crazy, right? But, when I first started doing this, I was like, people are crazy, what are they? And then you get to a point where you're like, it makes sense. It makes sense to do this kind of stuff, right? It makes your drawings readable. It makes your drawings look professional. But I try and make sure my leaders line up, right? So I use my tracking. And then, do you see, I try and get the angle the same if I can. It doesn't always happen, but if you can, right? This is also a multi-leader. Close, right? And if it's slightly off, you grab it and you just kind of move it, right? But again, I try and make them similar. If I can, I CO copy, and I copy these down using my ortho, right? And I can copy multiple ones down and get exactly the same angle, right? And then I have all of these in line and I can just alter them, okay? I can usually tell by a set of drawings how much experience people have in, I mean with AutoCAD, but also kind of in architecture, right? Because you look at their drawings and, you know, if you look at a printed sheet, you can tell, you know, number one, the level of detail they've put in their drawings, you know, tells a lot, right? How much knowledge they have. But also if their drawings are neat, they're numbered correctly, their title blocks have been drawn correctly, if their dimensions are straight and they line up and they have an appropriate amount of white space around them so that, you know, they're not crowding the drawing, but they're not so far off, it doesn't make sense, right? If text is, you know, lines are crossing over things they shouldn't, or things aren't lined up, or, you know, you can really tell a lot about a person and their experience, or kind of how good or bad they are, right? By their drawings, because, you know, it's just very telling, right? You can look and say, oh, this person has a totally complete detail. Either, you know, they copied it from a detail library, or they knew about the detail and they knew enough to draw it, but then all their leaders don't line up and things are crossing over each other and they're messy, and you look at it and you think, gosh, they have such a beautiful detail there and it's worked out and it works great, but then their noting is crap, right? So it sounds weird to say, but it counts for a lot, right? Nice, neat drawings, things that line up, makes it very readable, it's very professional. It then translates kind of into you. People think that you know, you create nice drawings, and then that translates into you likely will do good work, right? So so drawing can, when you're drawing these, you know, making them neat and nice and constructed well, says a lot about you, okay? That's my spiel on that. So, you know, create nice drawings that are nice and neat and lined up. But this is multi-leader. One wonderful feature that they started doing several years ago, if I select my multi-leader, sorry, let me do it without selecting it. I can add leaders lines and I can remove leader lines now. You used to not be able to do that. But if I click on add leader, click, and I have the object selected, it magically adds another leader. Click, 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 escape. This is the best feature ever, right? Yep, so if I don't have anything selected, I click on add a leader, click, and it will say select, you know, the leader you want to add a leader to. So I click and click. Before, back in the good old days, you used to have to copy this leader, copy it up, M for move it back down, right? Have identical text on top of identical text, and then you get another leader, right? Which is a pain in the neck. And then if you moved one, it didn't move the other, you know, you had, you know, things not lining up. But I can add leaders, and because sometimes you have the same text note that points to multiple things, right? I can also remove leader. So I click on remove leader and I click and I hit enter. Oh, wait. And it goes away. Okay, so remove leader, click. Ooh, come on. Ooh, it's not wanting to grab. I'm thinking it may want me to grab the last one. Yep, it wanted me to grab the last one. There you go. The last one created. So you kind of have to go in order. But it works very well, right? So that's a really good feature that we have now. But that's dimensions. We have leaders. Use annotative features when you're generating them. I think it makes sense, and I think it works really well. But just know that, you know, not everybody also uses annotative methods. Periodically, I still work with some old coworkers of mine at firms I used to work at, and they won't get on the annotative bandwagon. Like, come on, people, right? It works really well. You know AutoCAD, let's just go with it. But not everybody uses it, so it's good to kind of understand that, you know, you may have to create these other dimension styles. But I think in general, this is probably the best method. All right, any questions on any of these?
If you're working on somebody else's AutoCAD template and they don't have annotative selected, can you just go in and check annotative and it will pick up right where you left off?
Yeah, so you would have to create a new annotative style and then change their dimensions to that annotative style, right? But otherwise, the way that they would have generated their dimension styles is they would have had a standard style, right? They would have hit modify. They would have had all of the same settings you have, but they would have under the fit, instead of choosing annotative, they would have chose use overall scale of, and they would have typed in a scale here. And so they would probably have 15 different dimension styles, each with a different overall scale set differently to, you know, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, whatever. Yeah. All right. Any other questions about dimensioning? Okay. I want you guys just to dimension your office layouts, right? So I don't remember when this is due, but I'm going to, has anybody submitted this? Is it tomorrow? Okay. I am going to, I'll extend the deadline on that then through the weekend, okay? And I want you, it's supposed to be perfect, right? But I want you to add the dimensions that are shown on there, essentially. I think I'm gonna add a little bit of hatch in there as well, right? So I'll extend it through the weekend so you have time to add the dimensions to
So that'll
it.
be our hatch assignment. So kind of.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep, okay. Stop recording.